There certainly isn't a lack of scary stories from Florida. Despite the carefree vibe and fun in the sun attitude that's been attracting spring breakers for years, there's a dark side to the Sunshine State. A swampy, spooky, backwoods side full of haunted dolls, swamp beasts, and restless spirits. So let's hop into the 10 creepiest stories and urban legends from Florida. At number 10, we have the legend of the Bloody Bucket Bridge. The legend of the Bloody Bucket Bridge in the town of Wauchula, Florida, dates back to around the Civil War. Allegedly, a recently freed enslaved person, who also acted as the local midwife, was smothering babies immediately after birth and telling the families they were stillborn. She would carry the deceased babies in buckets of birthing blood and fluids to the bridge, dump the buckets in the water, and bury the remains around the bridge. The story goes on to say her conscience began to get to her, or that her madness grew. She saw her bucket fill with blood all on its own, over and over. She also heard the cries of countless babies every time she neared the bridge. One day, she lost her footing, fell into the river, and drowned. They say if you go to the Bloody Bucket Bridge during a full moon, the river runs red with blood. At number 9, we have the Sunland Hospital site. Though much of the old Sunland Hospital has been demolished, the old administration building that remains is believed to be haunted. But where did these spirits come from? Originally a state-of-the-art treatment center for tuberculosis, the Sunland Hospital became a facility for the mentally and physically disabled of all ages, after a cure for tuberculosis was discovered. Unfortunately, like many hospitals of its kind, it was understaffed and underfunded, and reports of abuse and wrongful death began to spring up. An investigation launched in 1970 uncovered some highly disturbing facts. Unbearable living conditions and malnourished patients suffering from various skin and respiratory infections, a dirty surgical area, and a heavy rat infestation. Patients were strapped to their beds, unable to fight off being chewed up by rats all night. By the early 1980s, the Sunland facility was shut down, its ruins nothing more than a source for ghost stories. Many witnesses claimed to hear screams and strange lights appear in the empty building. The swings at the playground outside move on their own, allegedly inhabited by the spirits of the children who died there. At number 8, we have Devil's Tree of Oak Hammock Park. Inside Port St. Lucie's Oak Hammock Park sits an old oak tree that locals say is evil, or more accurately, that something evil occurred there, and it still haunts the land. In 1971, before the park was established, Gerard Schaefer, an ex-deputy for Broward County Sheriff's Office, raped and murdered two 19-year-old girls, Colette Goodenough and Barbara Ann Wilcox, then buried them beneath an old oak tree. He was tried for murder and stabbed to death in prison in 1995. The girls had been missing since January 8, 1973, but their bodies weren't discovered until 1977 when two fishermen noticed bones protruding from the ground. Local legends and ghost stories about the area include claims of blood-curdling screams erupting from the surrounding woods, ghostly apparitions, and camera malfunctions near the Devil's Tree. Police have responded to numerous calls claiming devil worshippers in hooded robes were performing rituals there. In 1993, the local diocese conducted an exorcism and erected a cross at the site. Numerous efforts to cut the tree down failed when chainsaws malfunctioned or axes broke. At number 7, we have Captain Tony's Saloon. Captain Tony's, established in 1852, is the oldest saloon in Key West, and supposedly the oldest in all of Florida. Randomly enough, it has a tree growing through its center. The tree was used for hangings, mostly of pirates, and they were forced to build around it. Before it was a local watering hole, it was an ice house and the island's only morgue. Any unclaimed or unpaid for dead were buried in the land right next to the building. An 1865 hurricane unearthed some of the bones, and one of the bodies recovered was used to create a memorial. Locals reburied the bodies and built a wall above it with several bottles of holy water inside. During construction in the 80s, workers made some startling discoveries after pulling up some of the original building's floorboards. The bones of around 8 to 15 bodies were discovered, as well as the marked grave of a woman named Elvira. Yes, Elvira. Bodies still remain in the building foundation, and Elvira's grave marker has been left exposed in the bar. At number 6, we have the haunting of the Pensacola Lighthouse. A gruesome murder occurred inside the living quarters of the Pensacola Lighthouse, and it's believed the ghost of Michaela Penelbar haunts the property. After Michaela married Jeremiah Ingram, the two became lighthouse keepers in 1826. Allegedly, they were happy for quite some time, but something shifted. The couple started fighting, and there was talk that Jeremiah was abusing her. Michaela became possessive and jealous, not of her husband, but over her lighthouse. One night in 1840, Michaela apparently snapped and stabbed her husband to death. She was never convicted due to lack of evidence, and she lived the rest of her days tending to the lighthouse. She finally had it all to herself, or perhaps the lighthouse finally had her. Even after her death in 1855, she couldn't bear to leave it, and both the tower and the living quarters radiate with paranormal occurrences. People have experienced visions of her, strange sounds, heavy breathing, objects flying across the room at tourists, and phantom bloodstains appearing on the new floor. The lighthouse is open for tours and has been featured on the Travel Channel and on Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters. At number 5, we have the Fairchild Oak. The Fairchild Oak in Ormond Beach has had front row seat to centuries of history. After 400 years, it isn't surprising this tree is haunted by two men who died beside it. According to legend, anyone who stands next to it is overcome with sadness. Norman Harwood owned the land the live oak is rooted in back in the 1900s, and he took his life underneath the shade of its branches. James Ormond bought the land and lived on a plantation there for a few years before mysteriously dying under the very same tree. It's possible the Ormond tomb and the tree are on top of an existing Native American burial ground. People have seen apparitions on the land, and many have instantly been filled with intense sorrow the moment they laid eyes on the oak. At number 4, we have the Devil's Chair. During a seance, trance medium George Colby claimed his Native American spirit guide, Seneca, led him on an exploratory mission to establish a spiritualist community. He went on to fulfill that prophecy in the backwoods of Central Florida, founding the Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp. Visitors claim to have seen ghosts all over the quirky little town, and its cemetery is said to be a hangout for the devil. Brick Mourner's chair within the cemetery is known as the Devil's Chair, and according to local lore, if you visit the chair at midnight, he'll pay you a visit. Apparently, if this devil is quite the party animal. If people leave beers on his chair overnight, they'll be empty the next day, sometimes even empty, but still sealed. Number 3, we have the legend of the skunk ape, possibly my favorite. The skunk ape is Florida's very own version of Bigfoot, with an unbearable odor, hence the name. These elusive creatures stand about 7 feet high. The stinky beasts like to hang out in alligator caves with animal carcasses. The validity of the sightings of this creature is unknown, but for every scientist or wildlife expert who says the skunk ape doesn't exist, there's an eyewitness who will swear it's real. At number 2, we have the Riddle House. This Edwardian West Palm Beach house, built in 1905, was originally a funeral home until Carl Riddle bought it and made it a family home in the 20s. The haunting allegedly started after one of Riddle's employees hung himself in the attic room of the Riddle house because he saw no way out of his financial hardship. According to Carl Riddle's diary, the energy in the house changed after the death. Employees had strange experiences and heard voices when no one was there. Many quit. Carl moved the beam that held the rope, but it did no good, and the haunting continued, so Carl moved his family out of there. The historic house was preserved and relocated to the yesteryear village at the South Florida Fairgrounds, and the ghost moved with it. During the reassembling of the house, the construction crew often found broken windows and tools that had been left in the house attic or on the lawn outside. The ghost is known for attacking men who wander up into the attic. The Riddle House is one of the most active haunted houses in the U.S. and has been featured on the Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures. At number 1, we have Robert the Doll. Robert Eugene Otto grew up in Key West with a nanny who practiced voodoo. Before leaving, she gave young Robert a 40-inch tall doll many believe is possessed. Little Robert gave his own name to the doll and started going by Gene. Gene spoke to Robert all the time, and he swore the doll was real. The children claimed they saw the doll looking out the window of the Otto's home at them. The Otto family began to believe their son's doll might be possessed, but young Gene kept Robert well into his adulthood, despite the fact that he creeped his wife out. Now Robert spends most of his days in the East Martello Museum in Key West, when he's not traveling to other museums or appearing on paranormal television shows. Visitors are warned to ask permission before taking his picture because cameras have malfunctioned for those who don't.